Kia ora koutou and good afternoon everyone. Today the Government is tabling the final report of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historic Abuse in State and Faith-Based Care. Since the Royal Commission was established in 2018, 2,400 courageous survivors have shared their experiences of abuse and neglect in state and faith-based institutions. Today is about them, the survivors and their stories. And to the survivors I want to say thank you for your exceptional strength, your incredible courage and also your confronting honesty. I cannot take away your pain, but I can tell you this. Today you are heard and you are believed. The state was supposed to care for you, to protect you, but instead it subjected you to unimaginable physical, emotional, mental and sexual abuse. A number of faith-based schools, institutions and people in positions of authority who you should have been able to trust failed you in the worst possible way. This is a dark and sorrowful day in New Zealand's history. And as a society and as a state, we should have done better, and I am determined that we will do so. It is also my heavy duty to say that today the Government is also formally acknowledging that the experiences of some children and young people at Lake Alice Hospital did amount to torture. Patients at Lake Alice were given electric shocks without anaesthetic, as well as painful and immobilising paraldehyde injections. And these so-called treatments were not administered for medical reasons. They were used for punishment and for emotional control. These experiences were nothing short of horrific, and they happened in a New Zealand health system within living memory. To the survivors of Lake Alice, thank you for your determination to ensure what you suffered was brought to light. I am sorry that it has taken so long for this acknowledgement of torture. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care report is of historical significance to New Zealand. It is the result of the largest and most complex public inquiry ever held on our shores. And because of this, the content needs to be considered with respect and with care. It cannot be rushed. The first step is a formal apology which will take place on November the 12th, and we are working with survivor groups on that. The apology will also provide an important opportunity for the Government and the leaders of other political parties to take responsibility on behalf of the nation for the failures of the state across many governments. I now want to hand to Erica Stanford, who will lead the Government's response. But before I finish, I would really like to thank the inquiry team for all of their work and for the compassion that they showed in compiling this report. And finally, to the survivors, thank you. We will never lose sight of what you have endured to bring the truth to light. Erica.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Tēnā koutou katoa. Today is an historic day for New Zealand. Thousands of incredibly brave survivors have told their stories that are now etched in the pages of our history, the record of a very dark stain on New Zealand's past. The stories contained in this report serve as a jolt of reality. The kinds of unimaginable, despicable horrors and abuse and neglect in care that we always believed happened in other countries happened here. They happened at scale and they destroyed lives. To all the survivors who courageously shared their experiences with the Commission and now today with New Zealand, you have my utmost gratitude and respect. As the lead Coordination Minister for the Crown Response, I have read all of the stories. The pages of those stories tell us that they were young, they were vulnerable, and they were terrified. They repeatedly spoke truth to those who they thought were there to protect them, and too often these stories were ignored. The abuse was covered up, and the investigations were botched or entirely absent. The Crown owed them a duty of care and protection, and we utterly failed them. As a Government, we are committed to delivering a response to the report with the respect and the dignity that it deserves. Over the next few months, Cabinet will consider the findings and the report's 138 recommendations and the 95 recommendations from the redress report, and we will make decisions and initial priorities. As recommended by the Royal Commission, we are prioritising decisions around redress for the survivors of abuse and care. These decisions will respond to the recommendations for redress, as well as the recommendations made by the Independent Redress Design Group on a survivor-led redress system. I have heard the survivors loud and clear. They must be at the heart of all of the work that we do. There are also recommendations that will require a lot more time to properly consider and respond to, particularly those involving legislative and major organisational change, and this work will progress in 2025. This is complex work, and it will take time to get right. There will be challenging discussions ahead for all of us. We know the survivors have waited a long time for this report, and we are keen to see, and they are keen to see, actions on the recommendations. What I can commit to them is we will engage with the Royal Commission's report and recommendations in good faith, with careful consideration, and provide more clarity by November. Today, as the Prime Minister said, is about survivors. Today, we hear their stories. Today, we acknowledge their bravery. And their bravery will not only correct the historical record, it will change our future. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Erica. With that, we're happy to take a few short questions. As you can understand, we'll keep moving through the day, but happy to take a few questions.
What does the formal finding or acknowledgement of torture mean for the survivors, especially for the settlements that they've received so far?
That is what we're going to be working on right now, as Erica said. We'll be working on redress, particularly for the Lake Alice victims around torture, but also for all of those survivors affected here as well.
Just following up on that, I mean, there's been testimonies given, and this report shows that there has been knowledge of what you say does amount to torture by some people in the public service who remain in senior positions. What will you be doing to seek out those people and to hold them to account?
Well, I mean, we need to digest, I've read through the 82 individual accounts, I've read through the 5 case studies. I think we're all just shocked about how horrific and harrowing it is. I've been working my way through the reports over the last 3 weeks, and I can tell you it's pretty heavy going. And of course, we've got survivor support services available for people to be able to move to get the support that they need, to be able to have access to the records that they've provided to the Royal Commission. And if that is also helps them with police prosecutions, we're happy to we want to make sure that they can support that as well. Stand guys, we'll just go one at a time.
We know abuse is not just historic, it's happening to this present day. Will you as Prime Minister commit to making the changes required to stop abuse in care?
Absolutely, and that's why when we've had Mike Bush recently look at, for example, Aranga Tamariki, I can tell you that has been the conversation with Karen Chua and myself and within the Cabinet to make sure that we implement those findings and we make sure that we do put the standard of care in place. It's hard not to read these stories and to be determined that we have to have the weight of care fits really strongly, and you have to make sure that our most vulnerable kids in state care are incredibly well looked after and cared for.
Prime Minister, do you hope to get bipartisan support across the House when it comes to the recommendations and redress avenues to ensure that they are long-standing?
Yes, I would like that, yes. And I think actually across the House, again, over the last 6 years, I think you've seen all political parties acknowledge that this is something that we want massive amounts of bipartisanship around. This is not a political issue, this is a New Zealand issue, and it's important that all the political leaders have a role to play, and we will work really hard to make sure that we can do that.
Laura asked you whether there are people in the public service that are still working in the public service that had knowledge of the atrocities in this report and still remain in their jobs. What are you going to do about that?
Well, again, we will digest the report. If there's more police involvement needed and inquiry needed, we'll support that as well.
Dr. Luxon, can I ask, there's a whole volume on the connection between state welfare homes like Koitiri and Hokio and gangs. Is this going to lead you to rethink your policy on gangs, given that many of gang members are victims?
Well, what I'd say to you is what it has led us to do is to say... Sorry?
Can you say to the gang members, what would you say to them?
Well, look, I understand many gang members have come from very dysfunctional upbringings. I get that. But also we can't have gang members causing pain and suffering.
You haven't answered my question. Sorry. There's a volume on the connection between welfare homes and gangs. Can you
I've read that.
Speak to that?
Yes, I have read that, and I understand that. What I'd say to you is we're making sure we're increasing rehabilitation services in our corrections department, as you saw in the last budget, to actually make sure that people make the change they need to make.
Prime Minister,
talking
will you?
about redress.
Yes.
What do you think the financial liability of the government is from this report?
I'm not really focused on that at this point in time. We have decided we want to start from a principles base, and we'll make sure that we work with the survivor groups around that redress. And frankly, that is not a consideration at this point.
Rehabilitation and corrections is kind of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
Yeah.
Will you commit to allowing gangs to access some of the funding, some of the support systems that are going to be set up through the redress and the recommendation process? Will you be happy to see gangs access that, given the connection that state care has to the establishment of gangs?
Well, as I said, we'll work through the redress from here until the end of the year. Yes, our intention, we're going to work really hard at it. But what I'd just say to you is we are determined to make sure that we deal with solving these problems, as you say, at the top of the cliff, not at the bottom of the cliff. And that requires us to embed social investment, which is what we've done in the creation of the Social Investment Central Agency at the budget, where we actually do want to deal and make these powerful interventions before people's lives are actually wasted and in the wrong pathway.
Are you happy for those gangs to access some of that funding?
May well be, but the point I'm saying to you very clearly is our gang policy, we are determined that gangs cannot peddle harm and suffering on their fellow citizens. We will continue to work with making sure that they have an opportunity to turn their lives around through rehabilitation.
What's happened to them, Mr. Luxon?
Sure, but I understand gangs today cause pain and suffering to their fellow citizens as well.
Cause pain and suffering to
Sure.
them.
Yes, and that's why we'll have redress between now and we'll continue to work through the redress scenarios. But we also have to work on the long-term challenges that cause people to join gangs as well, and that's why our social investment approach and making sure it moves from theory into action is very, very critical.
Prime Minister,
You said that you read all of the stories, so did you go through, have you been through the entire report? Is that what you were saying?
I have been through the entire report, but I think the one thing that struck me were the stories and the volume that collects all of the stories that are throughout the entire report in one place, and the photos of those people. And I just want to say, of course they're all brave, but for some of them, they are current gang members, and their photos are in here, and they're telling their story of abuse. That is next level bravery.
Was there one particular story in there that really hit your heart in particular?
I think the stories for me as a mother, the stories around the young unwed mothers in those homes that were deliberately underfed because they wanted to have easy births and small babies, and then they drugged them up and they took their babies. They never got to hold them. That is confronting.
When will a meaningful redress system be in place?
Well, we're working on that, now. I mean, we really want to put big focus on that between now. It's a big priority for the government. We're working with it's important that we work with the survivor groups as well, and the redress and design group in particular. So we're starting. Today is about making sure that this report is actually tabled in Parliament. It's about making sure that the survivors actually know that they are heard and they are believed. Now we move forward between now and the end of the year, working incredibly hard around redress. Sorry.
When you sat down and read the report, just both of you, what were your first kind of gut reactions, and were you surprised by the scale of it?
I was surprised by the scale of it. I read all 82 accounts of the individuals. I read all 5 case studies about the institutions. My mother's a psychotherapist, and I've known people and her friends that have worked on this case. And I know the toll that it takes actually just reading, hearing the stories and actually writing them up and putting them together. And that's why I have huge admiration for people who've worked on the inquiry as well. So yes, I mean you survive. You just. I guess my reaction is, I think many New Zealanders just don't think this thing would ever happen. Abuse on this scale would ever happen in New Zealand. We've always thought that we were exceptional and different, and the reality is we're not. The stuff that we've read about in other countries has happened here as well on a large scale, and people were let down profoundly, absolutely profoundly.
On civil litigation.
Sorry,
Just
Joe?
going back to the timeline question, it's obviously been a long road for survivors already. So can you today put some specific timeframes around things that you've already mentioned, like support around potential police prosecutions, inquiries, consultation, redress? Can you give some indication to survivors today of how long it's going to take to get some answers to this?
Yeah, I'll let Erica talk to that.
Look, we've already taken the interim recommendations of the draft interim report, and put many of those into action. So there are 8 of those that have already been completed. We've set up the Survivor Experience Service. There's publicity about abuse and care, release of the Crown Work Programme, consultation on development of redress and setting up of that independent redress group that has informed the work that we're about to do. So there are a number of things there. We have, as I said to you, we've prioritised redress. We are taking a number of cabinet papers. We've already taken a couple of high-level cabinet papers. There'll be a number of cabinet papers taken before the end of the year. What we've done with the redress is taken it in parts because it is very big and very broad. It's ambitious work, and it's very unique. It's not been done like this anywhere else. So we've broken it down, and we're taking a series of cabinet papers. And by November, we will have more to say to you about the decisions that we've made around redress overall, but also redress for Lake Alice. And we are deliberately prioritising that because of the fact that so many of the survivors are older and they are sick, and many of them have already passed away, and we know that time is of the essence.
On that team, can you say to survivors today that in terms of what redress might look like and I guess actually starting to see a process play out potentially around any police prosecutions or any further inquiries that need to take place? Can you put a timeline of the end of this year of all of that work actually being underway?
The redress is what we're working on at the moment. That is the thing that the report asked us to concentrate on and to prioritise was redress, and that is what we are doing at pace.
And how many years,
Sorry, Joe.
before they see that, sorry?
Sorry?
How many years would it be before you think all survivors will see the result of that?
Well, it depends on the decisions that we're making. We have only just started this process, but we are working at pace.
Prime Minister, do you accept that compensation will cost billions of dollars?
Look, I'm not going to. We're going to do it right. It's important that we address this up, and we do the very best that we can around redress. So we're opening up the redress conversations, and we're going through that. We'll work with survivor groups along that process. But I haven't given thought to the dollars. It's not about the dollars.
Cost quite a bit.
Sorry?
You must acknowledge that it's going to cost.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
Money.
I'm sure it will.
You're
But this is important to do it right.
To that kind of level of financial compensation?
Well, what I'd say to you is that hasn't been a factor in our considerations because actually, when you read those accounts and you read these reports, it's important we do the right thing, and we're going to focus and start there. Okay, last question, team.
Prime Minister, are you willing to admit that you made judgments about gang members without knowing their full history, without knowing what had impacted them, without knowing what had caused them to go into gangs, and you based government policy on something you didn't know about?
No, I disagree. I have understood what drives gang membership, and I understand that well. What I'm saying to you is we have gangs in our society causing huge pain and suffering on their fellow New Zealanders. That is unacceptable.
No.
That is unacceptable, right?
The inquiry has...
Sorry, guys. Last question. Sorry, can I go? Sorry, Mike. Can I go somewhere else? He hasn't had a chance.
One of the recommendations is to set up an independent commissioning agency to look after care and protection services. Do you view this as essentially the inquiry saying back to the state that Oranga Tamariki cannot be trusted with any of the care and protection for these children?
Well, look, what I'd say to you is there's 138 recommendations. There's 95 from the interim report as well. And we need to make sure that we go through the full report and the full set of recommendations. And it would be, it's not appropriate that I comment on an individual recommendation at this point. But suffice to say, we have 10 ministers involved in our ministerial group that are actually are going to work their way through those recommendations, and we'll have more to say about that later.
Just on Jehovah's Witnesses.